Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to News Dose. And for all of those people out there that were claiming Microsoft would never, that's a key word, never would close the Activision Blizzard acquisition without the CMA's approval, well, a very informative report was posted today that might say otherwise. Once again, this entire buyout is just one wild turn after another. It's just, you never know what to expect here, and it appears we could be on the way to something completely unprecedented depending on how the next few months unfolds. Then also, rumors going around that Sony may have snagged yet another high-profile exclusive with none other than Square Enix, and this could be a big get for them if it's actually true. Though this one certainly can be taken with a healthy dose of skepticism, which I will explain why here in just a bit. As always, though, if you enjoy this type of content, do hit those buttons below. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell. It is greatly appreciated. But with that said, let's just go and jump right into things, starting off with the Resident Evil franchise. Now, I keep saying this, and that's because I genuinely do believe it, but I think Capcom has been one of the best publishers and developers over the last 6 years. And a big reason for that are the Resident Evil remakes. Of course, they've done a great job with the new entries as well, Resident Evil 7 and Village, but in the off years, of course, we've gotten Resident Evil 2, we got Resident Evil 3, and then here recently we got the Resident Evil 4 remake. So they've been hitting just home run after home run with these games, but now we're kind of at that point. What's next for Capcom? Are they going to continue with these Resident Evil remakes? And, if they do, which entry? Well, Capcom seems to be wondering the same thing as well, because they are now sending out a survey that asks fans what other Resident Evil games they want remade. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're absolutely going to follow through with remaking the other games, but we have seen on various occasions these companies do like to gauge interest from their fans with these type of surveys, and that is sometimes a sign of what's to come. So if you do want to participate in a survey, I will drop a link in the description below. Let your voice be heard. But I think for me, there's really only three logical choices here that would make a lot of sense. Obviously, the first one being Resident Evil 5, just kind of pick up where they left off. I do understand that you can still play Resident Evil 5 on modern platforms. Got the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 Remastered Edition, but they could still remake that. Technically, you can play Resident Evil 4 Remastered on all the new platforms as well. So, you have Resident Evil 5. There's also Code Veronica. I've seen a lot of requests for that game. And then finally, and I'm a little surprised they didn't actually start by doing this game in the first place, and that's remaking the first game in the style of all of these other remakes. So maybe they could return to the first game here, but I want to hear from you all as well. Which Resident Evil game would you most like to be remade? Oh, and Capcom, maybe also consider Dino Crisis. It's essentially Resident Evil anyways, but with dinosaurs instead. So I'm just going to kind of go ahead and throw that out there as well. Capcom, please, let's make it happen. Next up, though, let's go and talk about Redfall and some of the reason this game turned out the way it did. Jason Schreier just posted a report kind of detailing what happened in development and how it ended up in the state that we got it in. And really the two primary reasons seems to be its lack of direction. Not everybody wanted it to be a multiplayer game. More on that here in just a second. And then also they were understaffed partially because, well, the lack of direction. They are connected here. Reportedly, 70% of the developers who worked on Prey left Arcane throughout Redfall's development, with a large portion of that coming from developers who didn't want to work on a multiplayer-style game. So, with that in mind, you really can just kind of chalk this up as ZeniMax being yet another victim to that mythical cash cow syndrome that we've so often talked about in the past, that focus on live service games. Reportedly, ZeniMax, being the parent company at the time, wanted more live service games, and with that, Redfall was born whether it needed it or not. It was planned to be an immersive sim, which is what Arcane is known for, but it also needed that live service content, and when it was first pitched in 2018, it was meant to have lucrative microtransactions, which was later ditched in 2021. So this approach kind of left Arcane developers confused as to how to make a game like this. Now that does kind of make sense in retrospect with how they tried to finalize this game as more of a single player game, but it still had that multiplayer focus on it as well. But one of the more interesting parts to this story is when Microsoft acquired Bethesda. With Microsoft now running the ship, supposedly some developers that were working on Redfall was secretly hoping Microsoft would cancel the game. However, as many of you all are aware, Microsoft instead took a hands-off approach. Phil Spencer seems to regret that now. But as I've said before, honestly, I feel like Xbox wasn't in a no-win situation here. Now, if they were to come in to cancel games, first off, it makes Microsoft look bad, and potentially it could also have these new studios mad at them about canceling something that they previously had no input on. That is damaging to their morale. So yeah, I think in hindsight, sure, we can make the argument that they should have canceled this game. But I think at the same time, for all those people criticizing Microsoft, I kind of feel like a lot of these same people would have also been criticizing them for canceling Redfall. It's kind of that Scalebound effect, right? But the good news here is that Arcane is now moving on to their next project, and Xbox and Bethesda, they had to have learned a lesson here that they can apply for their future games. Now, since we're on the topic of Xbox, though, we need to talk about what's happening with the Activision Blizzard buyout. Earlier this week, we talked about the cat speeding things along with the CMA appeal that will now take place on July 24th, which is great news for Microsoft. The CMA clearly wanted to stall things as long as they possibly can, but the judge did favor Microsoft there. The judge appeared sympathetic to Microsoft's urgency, and he even said some things that bodes well for Microsoft's case. I have a whole video on this topic in case you missed it, but hypothetically, if things don't go Microsoft's way, or if Microsoft wants to close this buyout before that appeal even takes place, well, according to a new report, it sounds like they're coming up with a plan B, a plan C, and even a plan D. They are working on new and creative ways to close this buyout with or without the CMA. This is coming from an MLAX report posted up by IDIS over on Resetera. I'll kind of go over some of the highlights, but it says Microsoft executives are actively looking at ways to close the acquisition despite a UK veto on the deal, MLAX has learned. Microsoft has hired extra lawyers and has tasked some with examining how it could close the Activision deal, MLAX understands. One option could include Activision exiting the UK for another European country in a bid to remove itself from the CMA's jurisdiction. Its games could continue to be sold via a distributor. One rub is that any such decision must be taken by Activision to avoid breaching merger laws that stipulate that merging companies must be managed separately and independently until they actually close. Another option could see Microsoft extend remedies given to and accepted by the European Commission to the UK unilaterally, even though they were rejected as insufficient by the CMA. Alternatively, Microsoft could seek to close the transaction and argue that the order was illegal in its defense when sued by the CMA. So this is a rather eye-opening development. I've seen so many people online claim that Microsoft would never consider any of these options, that the CMA is the be-all, end-all, and that there was no chance that Activision could exit the UK. For all those claims out there, it appears that's exactly what Microsoft is considering among various other options. Now, will any of this actually happen, though? Well, I think that kind of takes us back to what Satya and Nadella said while responding to the possibility of no longer selling Activision games in the UK, and he simply responded with a sly smirk. Let's just wait for it all to play out. Now, again, some people thought I was reading too much into that, but as I said back then, he could have easily shut down that speculation, but he didn't. Instead, he seemingly welcomed that speculation, and that is purposefully strategical. It sends a very clear message to both the CMA as well as the UK government. They are exploring all their options, and this report here, it only confirms that. At the same time, though, it also means quite literally what he said. Let's see what happens in the coming months. These backdoor options are more designed to be last resort methods. They're covering all their grounds just in case something doesn't go their way. An ace up their sleeve, if you will. But from how this report reads, it sounds like this will depend on how their appeal goes. There is some speculation that Microsoft might close the buyout before that appeal is made. You can't rule it out. But in this very report, it also says, and I quote, "The surprise speed of the CAT appeal process may dampen any calls within the company for it to close the deal regardless of the UK block." Now, I will say, this is a statement that comes off as speculation rather than inside information, but I, however, do think that it makes sense. With how well Microsoft's appeal hearing against the CMA went this week, it is possible that Microsoft and Activision maybe renegotiates a small extension by, let's just go and say, hypothetically 6 months, to just see how the cat rules against the CMA. If things go in their favor, well, the wait will be worth it. Now, of course, all this kind of remains to be seen, but by all indication, Microsoft is doing everything that they possibly can to power through this acquisition. The UK will not be the final word on this acquisition if Microsoft has any say in the matter. The only issue that I can see right now is that reportedly the CMA is trying to impose their block worldwide and not just to the UK. MLEX also brought this up by saying the company is also actively contesting the CMA's draft order that would give effect to its veto, banning Microsoft from acquiring an interest in Activision for several years and vice versa. The ability of the UK watchdog to impose a global ban solely to address concerns relating to the UK market is at the center of that, MLEX understands. Microsoft could challenge the final order in court to seek to narrow its scope to potentially allow it to close elsewhere in the world. So Microsoft is trying to work around that issue as well. They're being creative with their approach, but one thing's for sure here. The next 8 weeks are going to be highly interesting. Technically, Microsoft might try to close the Activision Blizzard buyout at any moment. Now, I imagine that they'll probably wait for the cat appeal, though, just because it seems like they do have a good chance with them, but, I mean, I guess we'll see. Right now, though, anything and everything is at play. We're all just kind of sitting at the edge of our seats to see what happens next because we're in uncharted territory now. Now, there's also a rather interesting rumor floating around regarding the Final Fantasy IX Remake. I know some of you are going to perk your ears up about that. This is one of those all-time great JRPGs out there, and the thing is that we've kind of known about this game for a few years now. It was a part of the NVIDIA GeForce Now leak back in, I believe it was 2021, which continues to prove accurate to this day. I mean, just earlier this week, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was confirmed for PC. That was also a part of that leak as well, and that's just one of the many confirmations that we've gotten since 2021. So this is not the first time that we've heard about a Final Fantasy IX remake. It appears more and more likely that this game does indeed exist, which that already is great news. But what's happening here is that a new rumor is now gaining a lot of traction online. I've seen several outlets report on this today, and it's just making waves throughout the community. So I thought it was at least worth discussing, but at the same time here, I do want to spread extra caution with this one. Now, I think that that's important with any leak or rumor. I always kind of like to say take things with a grain of salt until confirmed, but I think in this specific case, it's especially so because the lack of a proven track record from this specific insider making this claim. This instead is coming from I'm a Hero 2, somebody over on the Resetera forums. Supposedly, the staff over there previously vetted a Persona 3 remake leak from him in the past, and they saw enough to kind of deem that that was credible. So now people are taking this rumor seriously as well. If he was vetted for one thing, surely this is a legitimate insider here, and that's kind of where we are right now. Either way, just kind of take this with a healthy dose of skepticism. That's all I can really say about it. But he claimed here that he's seen the Final Fantasy IX remake himself and that it's still about 2 years away. He also claims that it's not coming to the Switch and that it has Sony written all over it. That to me, though, sounds more speculative than anything else. A lot of people are now assuming that it will be a PlayStation exclusive because of his remark, which honestly, even without his comment, this wouldn't surprise me all that much just because of Sony and Square Enix's history. Sony clearly wants PlayStation to be the home to Final Fantasy, so this wouldn't really be a major shock or anything like that. But I also didn't necessarily read into this post as some type of confirmation like some other people are making it out to be. The only matter-of-fact statement that he kind of posted here was that it's not coming to the Switch, which, again, also isn't some type of big surprise. If what he's saying is true and that this game is still 2 years away, well, the bigger question, I think, is whether or not this will be on Nintendo's next platform, not the Switch. If anything, though, this does kind of imply that this is a more graphically demanding game in maybe a similar vein as the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I think that that's great, again, if true. All in all, though, still take this rumor cautiously, and despite some of the exclusive speculation going around, I'm just kind of crossing my fingers that this remake does, in fact, exist in some shape or form, because Final Fantasy IX really is a great game. Let's just kind of hope that NVIDIA GeForce leak continues to give. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day that we're asked you all. Do you think we'll get a Fable update at the Xbox Showcase? That's the current rumor going around. Did Xbox actually tease Fable for the Xbox Showcase or not? And 70% of you all does believe it'll be there, whereas 24% of you all remain skeptical. So, I mean, yeah, you can see the growing expectation that this is going to happen. And I'll just kind of repeat what I said yesterday. If it's really not there, somebody at Xbox should probably get in front of this rumor and shut it down, because some might be disappointed if it doesn't show up now. But the fact that they still haven't responded to this rampant speculation, or at least that I'm aware of, I think that this kind of bodes well for this rumor. I'd say that it's fishy if anything else. Maybe they're teasing it after all. As always, though, still keep your expectations in check. I just think that that's the best approach with any type of showcase. But who knows? We might get an official look at Fable here soon enough. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.